My mom shouted in front of everyone at my job promotion dinner. "This isn't yours, you slept your way to the top." Then she spit in my wine glass. My manager froze. I whispered, "You just lost everything." But in that moment, my boss stood up and revealed something that made her scream. I'm 37, single, and recently promoted to vice president at the company I've worked at for nearly a decade. It's based in Charlotte, North Carolina, real estate, investment development, the kind of work that's both exhausting and thrilling if you're into numbers, negotiation, and winning long games. I've given my adult life to this career. My name's Fiona. Born and raised in Asheville. Grew up with just my mom, Clarice. My father, Reuben, left when I was 7 and never came back. I know now it's because she made his life hell, but back then, she told me he didn't love me. I spent years believing I wasn't worth staying for. That belief defined a lot of my choices growing up. Clarice is complicated. She had me when she was 20. She was beautiful, magnetic, and could destroy someone with a sentence. And often did. She drank a lot. I love attention. Hated other women. Especially me. As a child, I was either invisible or the cause of everything wrong in her life. I learned quickly how to survive her moods, by shrinking myself. Quiet, studious, invisible. I found refuge in books, libraries, school clubs, anywhere she wasn't. I left Asheville for Chapel Hill the second I graduated high school. Full scholarship, double major. I barely looked back. But no matter how far I ran or how much I built for myself, Clarice had a way of worming back into my life. Sometimes it was a birthday call that ended in her sobbing about her loneliness. Other times it was silence until she found out about a milestone in my life and needed to ruin it. And still, I kept reaching back for her. Hoping. Maybe if I just did a little more, she'd become someone else. The mom I wanted. Fast forward to 3 weeks ago. I was being promoted to VP. My boss, Alan Wexler, threw me a formal dinner at Café Siena, a beautiful Italian spot in downtown Charlotte. Skylight views, wine flights, the works. He insisted on inviting my family. I only had one person to name. Even as I said my mom, something inside me hesitated. The evening began beautifully. My team showed up in suits and sleek dresses. We toasted with Prosecco. There was laughter, clinking glasses, stories being swapped across linen-covered tables. For once, I felt seen. Not tolerated, not overlooked, but truly acknowledged. Then Clarice arrived. Late, of course. Loud, of course. She wore a sequined red dress that screamed for attention in all the wrong ways. Her perfume was so strong the table caught a whiff before she was even within earshot. She smiled like a movie star from the 60s, waving her hand as if she'd arrived at a red carpet event instead of her daughter's career celebration. She didn't greet me. She hugged my male coworkers, winked at Alan, and slid into her chair like she was the guest of honor. The discomfort in the room grew with each passing course. She started small, mild, passive-aggressive barbs about how expensive the restaurant must be. Then a story about how little Fiona used to flirt with boys to get out of detention. I laughed it off, praying she'd keep it together. Then she asked Colleen if I'd gotten the job because of talent, or something else. Her words were like sugar laced with arsenic. I gave her a warning glance. She smiled wider. By the time dessert came out, I thought the worst was over. And then, it happened. Right after the toast. Everyone had raised their glasses to congratulate me. Alan made a heartfelt speech about my dedication, my leadership, and my journey at the company. I felt tears in my eyes. It felt like everything I had worked for was finally being honored. Clarice stood up. "This isn't yours," she said loudly. Everyone went silent. "You didn't earn this. You slept your way to the top. Just like you always have." My entire body froze. Then she picked up my wine glass, looked me in the eye, and spit into it. It was the sound of the wine glass clinking back down onto the table that brought me back. No one said anything. Colleen's face was pale. One of the interns actually gasped. Alan stared at her like she was a wild animal that had just wandered in from the woods. I stood. Looked her dead in the eyes. And I said, just loud enough for her to hear, "You just lost everything." And I meant it. I was done. The bridge was burning, and I wasn't throwing water. But then Alan stood up. And what he said next changed the entire night. "You really don't recognize me, do you?" Clarice blinked, thrown off balance for the first time all night. "I'm your stepson. Reuben's son." The silence in that moment could have cracked stone. "You, what?" Clarice said, stepping back from the table like he'd just struck her. Alan kept his voice calm, even, measured, almost too calm. "My father was married before he met you. I was 7 when he left us. He told my mother he met someone, was starting over. That someone was you. I never saw him again. And years later, I found out he died. Alone. Drunk. And according to what I've been able to piece together, miserable." He looked at her slowly. "I didn't know your name until Fiona showed me your photo. And then it all clicked. You were the reason." Clarice's mouth opened, then shut. Her hands trembled. "I kept it to myself because I wanted to see what kind of person you really were. If you had changed. But I see you haven't." He turned to the rest of the table. "I want everyone here to know something. Fiona has earned every bit of her success. She's worked harder than anyone I've ever hired. Her integrity, her loyalty, her intelligence, they're what made her a leader. And if any of you ever believe otherwise, you're welcome to walk out that door." He turned back to my mother. "You're done here." Clarice didn't argue. She backed away from the table, grabbed her purse, and left. No screaming, no final word. Just gone. The restaurant exhaled as she disappeared into the night. I sat back down, stunned. Alan looked at me for a long moment. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly, even though I didn't know the answer yet. "That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard from Clarice since. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. I'm not grieving. But I am. Processing. The aftermath has been oddly quiet. My coworkers tiptoe around me now like I've been through something unspeakable. Alan's been kind, but we haven't talked about that night in depth since. I think we're both still digesting the twist of fate that tied us together in the first place. What I want to know is, where do I go from here? Should I write her off forever? Do I reach out again later? Am I heartless for feeling relief? I don't know what kind of daughter I am anymore. But I know what kind of woman I want to be. And maybe, finally, that's not tied to her anymore. Since that night, everything in my life has felt a little off axis. Like I'm living in the same city, working the same job, but through a different lens. Quiet moments hit differently now. I wake up and don't immediately check my phone for a text from her. I walk into work without the dull anxiety that she might try to drop in unannounced or stir something up on social media. There's a strange peace, and yet, an ache I can't quite explain. The following Monday, I walked into the office like I always did, coffee in hand, coat over my arm, but I felt like I was stepping into a room of glass. Everyone looked at me with a strange mix of sympathy, curiosity, and cautious respect. A few people nodded quietly. 1 or 2 avoided eye contact. Colleen met me at my desk with an unspoken "Are you okay?" in her eyes. I just nodded. We didn't need to talk about it. But the thing that caught me most off guard was Alan. We had a quick one-on-one scheduled that afternoon. Typical post-promotion check-in. When I walked into his office, he closed the door gently and gestured for me to sit. I expected business. Instead, he asked softly, "How are you holding up?" It hit me then how deeply personal this was for him, too. We weren't just colleagues now. We were, by a strange twist of fate, linked by a man we both barely remembered, but who had shaped the wreckage of both our early lives. I shrugged. Still processing. I think I'm okay. Just tired. It's a lot. Alan leaned back, his expression unreadable. I debated for a long time whether or not to tell you. About your mom. About our dad. Hearing him say our dad was surreal. I didn't want to interfere with your relationship, he continued. Or try to drag you into my history with her. But seeing her. Seeing how she treated you, how she spoke to you in front of everyone, he paused. I realized staying silent would have made me complicit. I looked at him. Not just my boss anymore. Not just the man who gave me a shot at a better life. But someone whose childhood had collided with mine in invisible ways. Thank you, I said. It was all I could say. There weren't words big enough for the gravity of what he had done, for standing up for me, for exposing something so vulnerable in himself just to protect my dignity in front of others. We didn't talk about it again for a while. The next few weeks blurred with project launches, budget meetings, late nights at the office. I buried myself in work, the only place I ever felt in control. But even there, something had shifted. People treated me with more reverence. I wasn't just the VP anymore, I was the woman who survived that night. And still, in quiet moments, the questions crept in. Did I overreact? Should I have confronted her after? Demanded an apology? Had I finally become the version of myself that didn't need her? Then last weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove back to Asheville. I didn't go to the old house. I had no intention of seeing Clarice. But something in me needed to revisit where it all began, to walk those familiar streets, to sit outside the library where I used to hide with my backpack full of borrowed books. I parked across from the old Woolworth Walk downtown and watched people walk by, couples with dogs, old men with newspapers, high schoolers laughing in packs. Everything felt exactly the same, and yet nothing about me was. I stopped by a small diner Clarice and I used to go to when she was in a good phase, usually after getting a new boyfriend or a bonus from work. Back then, it was the only time she'd treat me like a daughter. She'd order pancakes and let me have extra syrup, laugh like we were best friends, and then go cold again the next day. I sat at a booth by the window, alone, stirring a cup of coffee that had long gone lukewarm. The waitress asked if I was waiting on someone. No, I said. Just remembering. I don't know why I thought coming back would give me clarity. All it did was remind me of everything I lost trying to love someone who saw me as a threat rather than a gift. Later that night, back in Charlotte, I received a message from an unknown number. The preview flashed on my phone as I brushed my teeth. You don't get to cut me off. You'll regret this. It didn't say who it was. But I knew. Clarice always used regret like a weapon. What she didn't understand is that the only thing I regret was letting her stay in my life for so long. I didn't reply. Since then, I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness. Not the kind where you reach out and rebuild bridges. But the quiet kind. The kind you do alone, for yourself. The kind that allows you to stop carrying the weight of someone else's choices. I haven't reached that point yet. But I'm getting closer. There are still moments I wonder what she tells people about me. If she paints herself as the victim. If she even remembers what she did that night. Or if it's just another entry in her long list of things she's rewritten in her mind. And sometimes I ask myself the hardest question of all, if she apologized, genuinely, tearfully, completely, would I believe her? Would I want her back? I don't have an answer. But I know this, I don't owe her access to the life I built out of the wreckage she left behind. Not anymore. A few days after that anonymous text, Clarice's thinly veiled threat, I got a voicemail. She hadn't left a voicemail in years. Usually, she just called repeatedly until I answered or texted back in exhaustion. But this time, she spoke. The message was short. Her voice was tight, clipped, but sober. Controlled. Fiona. I don't know what you're trying to do. But you're my daughter. You don't get to cut me off like this. I've made mistakes, sure, but that's not a reason to humiliate me in front of strangers. I raised you. Alone. That counts for something. Call me back. That counts for something. It echoed in my head for hours afterward. Did it? Did merely keeping a child alive count for something if the emotional toll left behind was a crater that took decades to climb out of? I didn't call her back. But that night, I pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years. It was buried at the back of my hall closet, beneath a pile of scarves I never wore and shoes I swore I'd get repaired one day. Inside were old photos, handwritten letters from college friends, my high school diploma, and a thin folder labeled Dad. There wasn't much inside. Just a couple of old photos, one of him holding me as a toddler in our front yard, and another taken on a fishing dock I have no memory of. A few cards he'd sent early on, before he vanished completely. Most were never opened. Clarice must have intercepted them, thrown them in this box out of guilt or convenience. One card was signed, "Love you always, Reuben." I hadn't seen his handwriting in over 30 years. I stared at that signature until my eyes burned. The next day, I asked Alan if we could talk after hours. I wanted to know more. Not about Clarice, but about Reuben. Our dad. The man we had both known in different forms, both lost in different ways. We met at a quiet cafe near the office around 7:30 p.m. It was mostly empty. Just the smell of espresso and the sound of dishes being stacked in the kitchen. Alan wore a soft expression I hadn't seen on him before. More human than boss. More brother than colleague. I only remember fragments, he said, stirring his tea. He loved music. Played guitar badly. Sang old Elvis songs in the car. Used to take me to the park every Saturday until he met your mom. He paused. I remember the first time he didn't show up. Then the second time. Then. He was just gone. I listened without interrupting, because every detail he shared filled a gap I didn't know existed. He used to carry a little photo of you, Alan added. He showed it to my mom once. Said he had a daughter now. That he was starting fresh. I swallowed hard. He left you, I said. He abandoned you. Alan nodded slowly. He did. And he left you too, in a different way. There it was. Our shared fracture. I used to think I hated him, Alan said. Then I realized I hated the circumstances. The choices he made out of weakness. I think he was scared of being torn between two lives. So he disappeared instead of choosing either. It was quiet after that. The air between us is heavy with grief that was never quite given permission before. Then he said, I think we're both stronger than he was. And in that moment, I felt something loosen in me, some old knot that had lived in my stomach since I was a child, since I started wondering why no one came to get me, why no one stayed. Later that week, HR sent out the formal internal press release announcing my promotion. My inbox flooded with congratulations, LinkedIn requests, old classmates coming out of the woodwork to comment how proud they were. But what stood out was a handwritten note I received in the mail, no return address. It said, "You didn't earn this. You were always a liar. Just like your father." That was all it said. No signature. But I knew. It was the same scrawl from old notes she'd left me in high school when she was mad, the same aggressive loops and underlined words. The venom only she could deliver so succinctly. Clarice never needed paragraphs to cut deep. I didn't react. I didn't call. I didn't cry. I slid the note into a drawer and went about my day. Because reacting would have meant she still had power. But that night, I sat on my balcony overlooking the city. The skyline was quiet. The buzz of traffic below was faint. And I thought about cycles. How people live the same stories over and over until someone, anyone, finally decides to break them. Maybe that someone was me. A few days later, I was in the middle of reviewing a pitch deck when Colleen knocked on my office door. She stepped in without waiting. "Hey," she said. "You've got a visitor downstairs." I blinked. "What? Who?" She looked uncomfortable. She said her name is Sandra. She didn't have an appointment. But she's insistent. The name didn't register. I walked down to the lobby with that familiar twist of unease curling in my stomach. Who shows up at someone's office unannounced unless it's bad? When I stepped off the elevator, I saw her. A woman in her mid-60s, short gray hair, sensible shoes, and a nervous smile. She looked like she belonged in a book club or volunteering at a community center. I didn't recognize her at all. She stepped forward. "Fiona?" I nodded cautiously. "I'm Sandra. I used to be married to Ruben. I'm Alan's mother." I froze. Her eyes were kind, but they held something else too. Something heavy. "I know this is unexpected. I've been wanting to meet you. For a very long time." I didn't know what to say at first. Sandra stood there with her purse clutched tightly in both hands, the way older women do when they're unsure whether they're about to be embraced or turned away. Her eyes flicked toward the ground, then back up at me, hopeful, but apologetic, as if she had already decided she was intruding. I gestured to the cafe down the block. We didn't speak until we had our drinks, coffee for me, chamomile tea for her. We sat near the window, away from the small lunchtime crowd. Sandra looked around before settling in, like she was mentally rehearsing how to start a conversation she'd imagined 100 different ways. "I hope this wasn't too forward," she finally said. "I've been thinking about reaching out for a while." Alan mentioned what happened with your mother." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, encouraging her to go on. "I was married to Ruben for 8 years, she said softly. He was complicated, charming, but soft-spoken, too. When he left, I thought it was for a phase. A fling. Something temporary. I never expected it to be permanent." She paused to stir her tea even though she hadn't added anything to it. "I didn't know about you for a long time," she said. "Not until after he was gone. Alan told me years later that he had tracked him down, found out about Clarice. About everything." I studied her face, warm, but lined with years of disappointment. She didn't speak about Ruben with bitterness, just sadness. Like someone recalling an old scar that no longer hurt, but still ached in the rain. "He loved you," she said. "Alan, I mean. From the moment he knew you existed. He didn't talk about it often, but I could tell. That night at your dinner. He was so shaken when he came home. Said he couldn't believe what your mother had done. Said he'd never seen someone stand up so straight after being spit on." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "He told you that?" She nodded. "He admires you, Fiona. Deeply. Not just professionally. Personally. He thinks you're the strongest person he knows." That hit something in me I wasn't ready for. The tears didn't come, but my chest tightened in that familiar, unwelcome way. Sandra reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn photo. She slid it across the table. It was Ruben, maybe late 30s, sitting in a lawn chair in front of a grill, grinning at the camera with a beer in one hand and a toddler in the other. "That's Alan," she said. But Ruben carried a different photo in his wallet later. "Of you. Your mother must have sent it to him. You were maybe 4 or 5, smiling on a tricycle. I found it after he died." He had it folded up with a note on the back. It said, "My girl. Fiona." Just that. My throat clenched. I hadn't seen that photo in decades. Clarice used to have it in the fridge before it disappeared one day. I'd asked her where it went. She said she didn't remember. I didn't know what to say. I sat with that memory, with the image of a man I couldn't quite remember choosing to hold on to a piece of me even after he'd let go of everything else. Sandra took a sip of her tea. "I know I'm not family," she said. "Not to you, anyway. But I wanted to meet you. And say, I'm sorry. For all of it. For what you lost. For what Alan lost. For what Ruben didn't have the strength to face." And then she looked at me and said something I never expected: "I'm proud of you." That undid me in a way nothing else had. Not the promotion. Not the congratulations. Not even Alan's speech that night. Hearing those words from someone who had known the man who abandoned me, someone who didn't owe me anything, was like a balm on a wound I didn't know was still bleeding. We talked for almost 2 hours. About nothing, and about everything. About Alan. About Ruben. About her garden, her church, her dog named Daisy who was afraid of thunder. She didn't pry. She didn't push. She just sat with me like someone who wanted to witness my life, not judge it. When we stood to leave, she said, "If you ever want to come by. Or call. You'd be welcome." I mean that. I believed her. And something about that made me feel steadier. Not healed. Not yet. But less alone in the wreckage. That weekend, I went through the photos again. The old family fragments that no longer hurt quite the same. I thought about writing a letter to Clarice. Not to send, just to say the things I never got to say. The things that had been swirling around in my chest for decades. But when I sat down to start it, I found myself staring at the blank page. I didn't know if she deserved a letter. But I knew I deserved to write one. The act of putting my truth into words, even just for myself, felt like reclaiming something she had always stolen from me, my voice. I wrote until the sun started to set. Page after page of raw honesty. Anger. Grief. Confusion. Not a single apology. Just the truth. 2 weeks passed without a word from Clarice. No texts. No calls. No more anonymous letters or voicemails laced with guilt. Just silence. It was the kind of silence that used to feel suffocating, like the calm before she'd erupt again, but this time it was different. This time I didn't flinch from the quiet. I welcomed it. But Clarice hadn't disappeared. Not really. People like her never do. They just change their tactics. The next sign came not from her, but from a mutual acquaintance, Mrs. Lockhart, a retired high school teacher who still lived in Asheville and had known my mother for decades. She ran into me while I was in town for a quick meeting. She grabbed my hand and said, "I saw your mother at the salon last week. She said you were in some kind of trouble with your job. That your company was being investigated for nepotism. That your promotion was under review?" I blinked. It was a lie, of course. But a specific one. Clarice wasn't just grasping at straws, she was carefully sewing a narrative, thread by thread. I knew how she worked. She was trying to poison the well before the truth could fully settle in people's minds. And that's when I decided. I was going to end this. Not with screaming. Not with begging. But with a truth so public, so undeniable, that it would silence every whisper she'd planted. My revenge wasn't going to be about hurting her. It was going to be about removing the only thing she ever truly had control over, my silence. First, I scheduled an interview with a well-known regional magazine that had once done a profile on our company's leadership team. They were planning a follow-up story on women in executive roles, how we got there, what we overcame, and what advice we had for others. I agreed. But only under one condition: they let me write a personal essay to accompany the piece. They agreed. I poured my story into that essay, not with malice, but with honesty. I wrote about growing up in Asheville, raised by a single mother who belittled me more than she loved me. I wrote about surviving emotional manipulation, navigating toxic family dynamics, and still pushing forward with a fierce determination to carve out a life that was mine. I didn't name Clarice directly. I didn't need to. The truth spoke loud enough. When the piece was published, it made quiet waves, but powerful ones. Former classmates reached out. Old neighbors. Some with apologies. Some with confessions of their own fractured upbringings. People saw themselves in it. The shame I had buried for years was now a lifeline for someone else. And Clarice? Oh, she saw it too. I know because she sent me an email with the subject line, "What the hell is this?" I didn't open it. I didn't have to. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't watching her suffer, it was watching her lose the one thing she'd clung to for years, the version of the story where she was the struggling single mother and I was the ungrateful daughter. That narrative no longer belonged to her. It belonged to me now. A few weeks after the essay came out, something unexpected happened. Alan called me into his office. He handed me a letter. An envelope addressed in neat handwriting, the kind that looked practiced. Like someone who had rewritten it 5 times before sealing it. "It's from your mom," he said. "She sent it to my house. Asked me to give it to you." I stared at it for a long time. Not afraid. Just tired. "Do you want me to read it first?" he asked gently. "No," I said. "But I appreciate that." I took it home. I sat with it on my kitchen counter for 3 days. Then, one night, after pouring myself a glass of wine and lighting the candle I only used on quiet, reflective evenings, I opened it. Inside was a letter. 4 pages. Handwritten. A little messy. A little dramatic. Very Clarice. She apologized. Kind of. She said she was shocked at what I had written, that she didn't realize how much pain she had caused. That she had her own demons. That Reuben had broken her first and she did the best she could. She said I'd always been too sensitive but also too strong, and that maybe that combination made it hard for them to ever really connect. There was no direct apology for the dinner. No real acknowledgement of the years of damage. Just vague regrets. Soft denials wrapped in fragile half-truths. And at the end, a plea, "I don't want to die with my daughter hating me." I folded the letter. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply wrote one sentence on a sticky note, attached it to the last page, and mailed it back to her. Then stopped giving me reasons to. That was the last time I heard from her. No fireworks. No breakdowns. Just quiet. The kind that comes after a final door closes, not slammed, not locked, just closed. Permanently. And in the absence of her voice, something else bloomed. Freedom. Peace. I found myself sleeping more deeply. Laughing more easily. I went out to dinner with Alan and Sandra one night, and for the first time, it felt like a real family table. No tension. No performance. Just people showing up as they were. Colleen and I grew closer. We'd started taking lunchtime walks around the block, talking about things that had nothing to do with work, TV shows, awkward dates, travel ideas. One day, she said, "You seem lighter." And I did. Because letting go of Clarice wasn't just cutting ties with her. It was reclaiming every part of myself she'd tried to suppress. My confidence. My voice. My worth. I didn't need revenge to ruin her. I just needed the truth to set me free. And it did.